Welcome back to the Redefining Retirement podcast. This is episode 11, and I am here with Eve Enslow. I'm going to let her introduce herself to you in just a second, but first, I just want to remind you to hit like, hit subscribe, leave comments, and all that kind of stuff because this podcast is all about helping Gen Xers in their 40s and 50s reinvent their lives and bet on themselves, right? And Eve's gonna show us how she did that today, so that you guys can see that this is possible. So, Eve, why don't you start by introducing yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Corey. Really great to be here. This topic is like really actually near and dear to my heart. So I started working the minute I turned 16 in high school, and I was like really driven, went right into a tech career. And then, as you can imagine, when I hit my kind of late 40s, early 50s, burnout hit hard. I was a global marketing leader at Microsoft. And then I worked in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. And I developed through various set of experiences in my life, everything from being a trained journalism to
Mm,
working as an individual coach and writing a lot of content for executives. I ended up pivoting my career just a couple years back to focus on coaching individual executives on their personal branding. So not only have I had my own journey, I've worked with a number of people now over the last several years, really figuring out what their next best iteration of themselves, their next best life looks like for them.
cool, that's cool, and we're gonna get into that a little deeper as we go. But first, like on this podcast, what I like to do is I like to start with, kind of like your early career, or if it even is a career at this point, let's just say the first phase of life, high school slash in your 20s.
Yeah.
And then we're going to move into your main career, family, and then we'll get into the aha, like I need to get the hell out of here moment. We'll get that in the third stage. But first, tell us about your early days, your high
Yeah.
school, like what is it that, what did you think that you wanted to do when you wanted to grow up or when you grew
Yeah,
up?
that's a great question. I mean, I got a job, like I said, very early on. I knew I was university bound. I knew I wanted to get a 4-year degree. I'd been involved in performing arts, and so I was really interested in communications in general. And so I got a job like the minute I turned 16 in
Mm,
a
me too.
local pharmacy, and I worked. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was actually working about 35 hours a week
Damn.
in
Yeah.
order to save money to get, going towards university. And at university, I pursued a degree in broadcast media and journalism. And did that between the University of San Francisco and then the University of Washington. Came out with a broadcasting degree at a time when funding for a lot of television, especially public television, which is really where my heart was. I was really interested in educational television, documentary, those sorts of things. Funding was just sort of drying up. And so I was really like faced with this conundrum of, move from Seattle, which was a place that I really loved at the time, to a much smaller market and hope to get a job and work my way up in a much smaller market, or pivot. Lucky for me, that was 1996, and the internet had just become
Mm,
consumer friendly. And so, like the version one internet browsers, and the ability to sort of have like a friendly interface into the internet and online content had just emerged and was emerging. And so I took a pivot, and I transitioned very quickly into a career thinking about internet technology and how content would be served in a lot of different ways. And I went very quickly to Microsoft in my young 20s. So, by the time I was 25, 26 years old, I was signing on to a tech career job, for 40 hours a week, which quickly became 60 hours a week. But it was exciting, and I was working on developer technologies, and it was a chance to just really kind of blend my skills of communications, but also I recognized that I had a real love for thinking about technology and thinking about how technology could make people's lives better.
It's really interesting. It kind of parallels what I was doing. I started going to college. And what I mean by that is like I went to one semester of college and I was a mass communications major. And then I ended
Yeah.
up going in the army for a while, and that just kind of, I won't get into that, but I ended up not staying on that path. But it's interesting, like you mentioned, how like when the internet came along, because it always seemed like there was such a small amount of opportunity out there for a broadcaster, right? Like, or just any communications thing, right? Because you're either part of a giant, media conglomerate, or that's it. I mean, you had to be in a big market. And I guess I let that get into my head. But when I saw the internet, like you, I was just like, oh my God, like anybody can do this now, like, especially like that's when I started podcasting early. It was very similar to that. I'm like, oh, well, I always wanted to do this. Now I could just do it from my basement. So it's very cool to hear
Yeah.
that you kind of had this similar thing. And it's the same way too. Like, I feel the same way where people having it helps everybody and it kind of levels the playing field for everybody, so it was a huge opportunity. So it's cool to hear
It
someone else
was.
that was kind of thinking along those lines. So you get to this point now, and you said, you kind of alluded to, you're getting to like 60 hours a week, like you're in your late 20s at this point, or where are you at
Second half of
in this
my
next
20s, 26, 27, and it was really exciting time. I felt like I really came of age, if you will, at that point. I was doing a job called developer evangelism, and that was an
oh
arm of marketing. It was like technical marketing, and my responsibility was to really take care of and build community with the top 300 web development firms in the world. And so it was exciting. I was traveling. I was meeting a lot of really interesting people who were trying to figure out what to do with this new technology. And then, one of my ideas was, well, this is really interesting, but Microsoft isn't using this technology for their own major events. And so
oh
I had this idea, which is like, why don't we use streaming technology to bring, some portion of Microsoft's largest events, tech ed, PDC, et cetera, to the web for the very first time? And I started talking about that idea. I started talking about that idea with some of the streaming media product people. I started talking about it with some of the more technical go to market and technical marketing people. And at that time, there were like just extra computers sitting around in closets, and you could grab one and throw it under your desk and you could build stuff. And so that's what we did. We got what we called a hack box, and we built one of the first, what I would call, online event or online learning platforms ever, like in the world. And we brought Microsoft's two largest events to the internet. And so it was a really exciting time, Corey. And I think one of the things that happens to us, and what I see with my clients is there's this perception that you can't do it again.
yeah,
Like that age of opportunity is gone and it's not going to happen again, or it isn't out there. And that's one of the ideas I just want to totally debunk.
yes,
Like those of us, I think especially in Gen X, we have such an adventurous, kind of spirit to us. And we're always looking for like, how do I keep myself interested and engaged? There's always a new frontier and you're not washed up.
yeah.
So if you think about that energy you had in your 20s, it's there. It's probably just not for what you were doing all this time. It's probably for something new.
That's no, that's super important. I feel like opportunity it's becoming more and more exponential, if that makes any sense. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Totally.
because when I was talking to earlier about, like, think about broadcasting, or being a mass comm major in this, in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's like there was only so many places you can go. Now it's like everybody has that opportunity. And every time there's a new platform, every time there's something new that comes around. Now we have AI just took and just threw even more exponential on top of everything. A lot of people look at it like it's kind of a, like, it's going to kill jobs. And yes, it certainly is. Every new technology comes along and, wrecks things. It just always does. But there's always more opportunity that comes out of that because every new solution
Right,
creates more problems, right? And those problems are
right,
more opportunities. So that's cool. And I
right.
had no idea that you were, I mean, what you were just telling me about like your early days at Microsoft, that is amazing. I mean, that is like you are legit like almost patient zero for when you're telling me those stories. I'm like, wow, okay, you're talking about streaming in like the late 90s. I mean, that is early. That is super early. And then
Yeah.
helping people with, like you said, helping developers understand how to use Microsoft's technology. I mean, it's just like that is like, man, that's early, early days. So that's really cool to I don't know, that's just really cool. I don't think I've met anybody that was that close to the sun. So
Yeah,
that's
in fact,
cool.
I mean, if anybody is interested, I wrote a book called Inspire,
Oh,
Go
cool.
Big Without a Corner Office.
Mm,
And I tell a bunch of the stories from those days and really talk about what was special about the various people who were successful at that kind of innovation. And the great news is that anybody can be successful at that kind of innovation. There's just sort of certain behaviors that you embrace, certain mindsets and certain behaviors that you embrace if you want to do that. And I think, Corey, what you were saying about the way that technology shifts over time, if you think about it, you can make that case all the way back, as far back as humanity, right?
yeah.
Things that were handmade became replaced by machines. But there were still jobs, you know, and I think that's true going forward. When I think about growing up in Washington State, there was a huge amount of transformation. When like jobs like logging went away and Boeing, was one of the big companies, and a lot of Boeing jobs moved, and people thought, what are we going to do? And then of course, Washington State and the Seattle area became a huge tech center. And so I think it's, we need to sort of look forward and think about, well, how do I want to contribute? And if you think about opportunities, energy, clean energy, sustainability, all of these are such awesome, emerging opportunities to contribute.
Yeah, no, there it is. And it's like it's a thing that I'm always telling people all the time because there's a lot of people out there like, oh my God, I'm so screwed. Like there's just nothing left. I missed the big boom of, I missed the internet, you know, boom and all this. It's like, no, everything's still out there. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. And that's a whole huge topic. So what what is it that you cuz one of the coolest stories you told me when we first talked was you were talking about how you went from Washington to Maine. And this is probably is this your story of like, okay, I need to change again. Like, okay, I've had this period of my life.
Yeah.
We were we were on the rise. We were, kicking butt and taking names at Microsoft, but like you get to this point where like, you know what? Maybe I should be looking at something else, or is that kind of how
Yeah.
it
I
worked
mean, your
for you?
life changes, right? The deal changes, right? The deal changes for us all. I mean, we age, we get into a different stage of life. I had a child a little bit later at 39. And so I was facing my 40s, raising a child. I was widowed. So I was raising a child on my own. And I realized, like I had a finite amount of energy,
Yeah.
and I had a finite amount of energy, physical, emotional, all of that. And when you're working in a really fast paced kind of role in a job in an industry where things are urgent all the time, which is kind of technology, and you are really being pressured to constantly be keeping up, the amount of energy I had left at the end of the day to take home to my child, I realized it's like it wasn't enough, and it wasn't acceptable, to
Yeah.
me anymore. And so I was thinking about, all right, well, what do I really need to do? And when I looked at my environment and I looked at all the different pieces of my life, and it wasn't just the job. I mean, Seattle, and I was living in West Seattle, right in the city of Seattle. It's congested, there's traffic, you spend a lot of time, in your car if you want to do activities. The days are just difficult. And at least that's how I experienced it. And so I started thinking about, could life be easier elsewhere? And at that time, I had the opportunity to visit a friend who had moved out to Maine and got a chance to experience what life was like here. And it's like, wow, I can live in a very peaceful, uncongested area that's only 3 hours of easy toll road driving to Boston. Significantly cut my cost of living and have more time for myself, my family. And it kind of went in stages, Corey. I made that move while I still had a full-time job with a Microsoft partnering company.
Yep.
And so I had some economic stability, and I made that move while I still had some economic stability. Even coming out here and really getting back into the place where I had lower cost of living and still had a genuinely 40-hour a week job. Not a 40-hour that was actually 55 or
Yeah.
even, 47. It was like a genuinely, 40-hour a week job. Um, and no commute, fully remote, no
Makes a
driving.
huge difference.
It transformed our lives.
Yeah, all that's a lot of extra time that you're spending in your car, and I haven't done it a ton over my lifetime, but I did have a period where I was driving an hour to work and an hour back, home,
Me
so
too.
that's 2 hours a day. I guess
20 hours, yeah, like 10 hours a week,
yeah, that burns up to I would say the only
40
thing that
hours
I
a
got
month.
out of that was, well, the appreciation for not having to do that, but the other thing was is, like, I at least educated myself. I mean, I was, like, podcasts crazy back, so I had
Yes.
a lot of time to learn and, immerse myself into, um, other people's thoughts and stuff like that. So yeah, I apologize, I cut you off there from the
No,
rest of it.
that's exactly right. I mean, that's what I did too. You try to make use of the time, but is that actually what you want your time for? And I think
Yeah,
that's where for me, it was it's like, no, I really want to be using my time at home with my family.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting, and it's like so, like, how is there anything I'm just trying to think, like, of, like, what's going on behind, the scenes for you as far as, like, the work part, like, what is the decision-making process? Like, okay, I moved across the
Yeah.
country. You said you still had your full-time, your 40-hour job. What is that all looking like? Were you like you had to be leaning on other skills or new skills? Or I mean, what was your thought process as far as like navigating to where you are right now? Like
Yeah, great question. Uh, you know, um, I mean, honestly, like if I'm totally honest, I think, I got bored.
yeah.
Like I realized I'd been doing really similar work in the tech industry for a long time. There was that, and there was I'd always worked for other people.
Mm,
And I think one of the big mind shifts, and Corey, I hear this a lot with my clients. I hear it with my friends who are this age. A lot of people right now in the tech industry, especially, are kind of going through the layoff cycles. So I hear it from those folks. I hear this kind of angst around, I have given decades of my time, my energy, and my talent to other people.
yeah.
I want to do something different. And I came to this realization. I was like, I want my time, my energy, and my talent to be used for its maximum good, doing the things that I am really passionate about doing and having the impact that I want to have in the world. And when I started thinking about how to do that, I realized that if I could support individuals, who are operating at the executive level, and the leader level. So, like director, senior director, VP, SVP,
Yeah.
CVP. If I could impact those people who were up to good in the world, who were up to amazing things in the world, and I could support them and make them better, then I could have a ripple effect on the world, and my impact could scale. And that felt really different to me as like a value proposition for getting up and going to work every day. Compared to I could work on this like one little project and make it like a little better, or I could sell a little bit more units of it.
Yeah, you went instead of just going like 1.5x, you wanted to go 10x. I mean, really, that's kind of
Yeah, 10, 20, 100x. Yeah. And most of all, I really come back to this thought. I want I want my time, energy, and talent to be put to its maximum good, its full potential. And one of the things I think the frustrations I hear with people that kind of get to this age and stage of career maturity is like, oh, my job's gotten really narrow, or I've been doing the same thing for a really long time, or I have so much more to give and I'm just not really being fully appreciated at work, or like I feel like I could be doing more.
yeah, no, you're totally resonating with how my trajectory worked the same way too. There was this element of like, I'm the kind of guy that once I learn how to do something and I'm doing it over and over, my eyes start to roll in the back of my head. Like I get like super bored. I had a lot of
Yeah.
factory jobs in my early 20s, so it was just like, okay, it's like there's no way I can do this. And that happened over a longer trajectory in my career as a mechanical draftsman. But like there was also, like you're saying, there was this disconnection from the value, like that I
Right.
could produce versus what I would get in return in a way, and I don't know how to explain that better
Yeah.
in your terms. You have more of a, like, mine was a little more monetary, I guess, because I don't know. Some of it was from, um, I just didn't believe in myself per se in the early days, like where I came up with some ideas at the company that I work with. And it was like, I saw how much it impacted the company from a monetary, like something I created, saved thousands of dollars every time it goes through the factory floor. And I'm like, oh my God, I could
Right.
do that. I didn't know I could do that.
Yes.
Like, and then I'm like,
Yes.
and then I started doing the math and I'm like, huh, how do I get closer to that value? And that kind of led me down the entrepreneurial path, and all these other things started to work out. So I resonate a lot with what you're saying. But yes, it definitely, um, it's almost like a heart payment kind of a way that you're talking about. Like, have you ever heard that term before? There's
You just said that and I immediately thought, I love that. I've never heard that, but I love that. Heart payment. I'm gonna steal that,
well, I'll tell you,
shamelessly.
I'll tell you who I stole it from. You know Paul Williams. He's a famous songwriter. He was well known for two things. One of them was he wrote the Rainbow Connection. Like that Kermit the Frog and saying. He wrote that song.
Oh, I
And he
love
was also
that.
and he was also the little guy on Smokey and the Bandit. That was like, the boss, the guys that were running the do you remember that?
Okay,
Did you
yep,
ever
I
watch
do.
Smokey and the Bandit? I don't know. That
I
maybe that's a
did, I
guy
watched them
thing.
all.
So
They don't
but
hold
yeah, the
up, by
little
the way,
guy.
but I did watch them at the
But
time.
but he's the one who said that. He was getting interviewed about songwriting, and they were just talking about, like, fame and all this other stuff. And he said, the best payment is heart payment. When people come and tell you like how much that song meant to them, if it changed your life.
Yeah,
And that's kind of what you reminded me of. Like I started my journey thinking about like payment, monetary payment. But as I've kind of progressed, it's like I always try to steer myself towards something that has more meaning, because I could have stuck with my fantasy football stuff in the early day, but it's like, and nothing against fantasy football people and nothing like that, because I still do that. But I felt like, you know what? I feel like there's just something more than talking about, football all the time, which I don't know. I'm kind of
yeah,
hedging that these days again, but you know what I mean? I felt like there must be something with more impact. And that's kind of
yeah.
why I'm on this project now. So I totally can understand that. So yeah. And I don't know where I was going with that other than to just kind of like,
Well,
try to help
I'm so
you.
glad you brought that up, actually, because, that's kinda where my head was going for next, and it's another big trend that I'm hearing from my clients, and especially, again, like, kind of at this age that you're targeting, that you're thinking about, which is sort of, mid-40s on into the 50s, which is, wealth has a more expansive definition to us.
Yes.
we started out in our 20s and we just had to make rent. And we had to think about making money, supporting our families, etc. And I certainly don't want to, I want to be sensitive to the fact that, we all still have bills to pay. I
Yes.
still, again, I'm like a solo parent. I've got a kid who's going to be, moving into the college years in a couple years here, and there's going to be some bills to pay. So I definitely don't want to make light of that. But I do think, like, we start to see and we start to round out our definition of wealth, right? And well being. And we start to think about, especially as we age, our health becomes really important.
Yes.
Rest becomes really important. Family becomes really important. Our relationships, our connections become really important. And, one of the things that I look at when I think about my full spectrum of wealth, it's not just the money, it's the network I've built over decades. It's, the personal connections that I've nurtured. I'm so fortunate that it takes me two hands plus to count the number of friendships that have lasted, more than 2 decades, that have
Yes.
been in my life. It's parenting and having, time to deeply parent. And so when we think about that whole, when we think about that wheel of like what does compensation and benefit in my life really look like across this whole spectrum of things, that that shifts for people, in your 40s, starting in your 40s and then on into your 50s.
Yeah, it's interesting when I hear people like just in comments or rebuttals to like the stuff that I talk about, the what I preach, the whole, redefine retirement, build a life that you don't want to retire from, and people are like, oh well, it's really easy for you to say, it's like they're shouting at somebody with first world problems in a way. But it's like I was there too. I was there where literally I didn't have much to bring to the table as a dad, for a couple of years because I was being entrepreneur, because I was taking the entrepreneurial route.
Yeah.
So I know what it feels like to be at the bottom. I mean, I'm talking like the bottom of feeling like an awful person because, oh, honey, I only have $500 this month. It's like that's the worst feeling to have 3 kids and only bring in
Yeah.
$500. So, and I understand the importance of money. So, but the thing is, I think the thread that runs through every high and every low is the fact that you just have to keep learning and you have to keep trying new things. You can't just curl up in a ball and say, well, it's never going to work for me, man. I'm just going to sit here and push this mouse for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you still have to try to put another foot in front of the other. You still have to try to learn stuff, and the more that you can align that with everything else in your life, which is not necessarily easy. I'm not saying like, oh, it's going to be easy, but the more you can align that with your life and all these other things that you discussed, the you're moving in the right direction. It's like a 1%
Yeah.
better every day kind
I
of a
love
thing, right?
that. I love that. And I didn't just, that's the thing, I didn't just like wake up one day and say I'm quitting tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep.
I started thinking about it a year out, a year, 2 years out, and I started just exactly what you're saying. I just started taking steps towards the next, and when you start to kind of have that in your mind, I mean, I think that's how manifesting works. It's like you don't set that vision today and then you wake up tomorrow and your whole life is different. What you hope for, though, is that, I'm sitting here today and I'm looking back over the last 5 years and thinking, wow, look how far I've come. And the things that I set out to do a few years back, like pretty much I've now accomplished and made those things real, and a lot of those things were getting to a point where, I didn't have to work so hard to make those bills and to give my kid a good life. Because, you talk about hitting the low around the paycheck. I hit the low on the other end, which was paycheck was fine. I was tucking my child into bed at night and my child was crying, saying, I didn't get to see you today. I didn't get
Yeah.
enough of you, mom. It was heartbreaking. And so, it's all about balance, I think. And like you said, just start taking steps. Take an online class. Start talking to people who are in a field you're interested in. That kind of exploratory action, you never know what kind of door is going to open.
It's very it's for I'm super fortunate. Like you tell me that story about not having enough time. Your child said that to you, and it's like I've never necessarily experienced that, that depth of that because I think I started waking up a little earlier, and I don't mean to say wake up, but it was like I started taking those steps and having these steps towards entrepreneurialism. And I did have 3 kids when I ended up going full time, but my job wasn't so intense before that, where I kind of moved into a salary position, and it was because I learned more stuff. Like I was a mechanical draftsman, but then my side hustle stuff, like, building a blog and, putting ads on Google, all these little things I was playing with on the side were spotted by people in my company. And they're like, oh, you should just come and work on our marketing team. And it's like, and I'm like, sure, why not? I didn't go to school for marketing. I just was just super interested in it on the side because I was looking for ways to get out of there, which maybe they didn't know that at the time, but, but, but it eventually opened up all this other time. And the last 2013 was the last time that I had a full-time like job, like I was employed. And I can't even imagine the things that I wouldn't have been able to do had I not been self-employed. Like I've probably I can't remember too many gymnastics meets. I can't remember too many, you know, go to lunch with your child at kindergarten or whatever, like all these little events over the last, how many years. My kids are all older now. Um, but it's like I seen a lot of that. I was available to go pick people up from school, to drop them off, to
Right.
go pick them up when they're sick. So had I not had that level of thinking or that, back in those days, that would have never been possible. So you have to believe, at least in the beginning, and you just have to take those little steps. Same thing with you. I mean, that was your reinforcement, was like, oh my God, I gotta do something about this. My reinforcement was a little different, but yet it led to all that. So
I mean, there
very
is that
fortunate.
element of faith, right? I mean, when I saw an opening or I had this idea, that perhaps my broadcasting, my journalism skills could transfer to Microsoft. I started with a temp job. I didn't get offered like a great job right out the door. I started with a temp job. I was doing a lot of really boring stuff, but I was also teaching myself the technology, on the side at the time. And I was able to show the people I was working for that I had some aptitude. And those people in turn became sponsors and got me into my first career job. I didn't have a degree in marketing. I learned those skills on the way. And then I wanted to just sort of respond to the other thing you said, which is, having that balance of like being available, to your kids and whatnot, and thinking about that. When I was thinking about leaving, right, that steady paycheck tech job, etc. When I was thinking about it, and I think it's really helpful to like kind of almost like a meditation or a thought experiment and getting into your body and really sort of doing some deep imagination. Like, what would it be like and how would this feel? Because I was thinking about this big question. Like, if I take this leap and I go, start my own business and consulting business, chances are I'm pushing back my retirement date.
Yeah.
I'm not, if I'd stayed in the tech job, I could have shortened that time, right, to retirement. But chances are doing it this way, I'm pushing back that date. And you kind of ask yourself, well, is that okay? Or is it not? Like, which future do I picture myself in? And I think for me, what really hit home was, I had lost a husband and I had
Yeah.
lost a brother to cancer. And I really thought, like, gosh, I don't like the idea of leaving all my free time till retirement, or I don't like the idea of being able to have time to pursue other interests and dreams to this magical retirement date. That doesn't feel good to me.
Did you so what you're doing now, do you care if you retire or not? Or is it a situation where like you'd still have to do it, or maybe you don't have to do it, but you feel like you could do it? Could you see
Right.
yourself at 80, 90 years old doing what you're doing now? Could you
Right. I think that's, and you're right. You're hitting it right on the point, which is like that idea of like redefining retirement, which is if I'm making some money doing stuff that I'm really enjoying and I'm feeling really fulfilled by, and I have enough time to do the other things I like doing, whether that's here locally or working on my property or whether that's taking some time off to travel. If I can build a life that pieces those things together, do I need to retire? No. Right? Do I want to retire? I guess I've started realizing like I'm a vibrant, energetic person. Do I actually imagine myself unplugging at some magical age, maybe at 65 or 67, and like playing golf or whatever it is, or just volunteering? And I'm realizing like, no, I actually want to be involved. And, why not be involved in a way that also, gives you some income? So I think that's kind of where I'm seeing a lot of people, again, in kind of our age group. It's partially a response to the economics, right? Like, how many of us can say for 100% we're ever going to get our social security? I think most of us are thinking like, I don't know. So we're starting to kind of figure out like plan B. What does plan B look like? And if I have to work, or if I'm going to be working into my 70s, gosh, why not shake it up? Why not
Yeah.
why not do something different? One of the things I'm even thinking about right now, Corey, is we have this full like end-to-end adult education center right here in the town I live in that you could do anything from go back and get your EMT certificate to, whatever. There's like 100 different skills you could go learn. And, I'm at the point where I'm like, gosh, as my kid ages up through high school and is spending less time with me, I have evenings. Maybe I'll just go learn a whole new thing. Why not? That would be fun.
Yeah, that sounds cool to me too. I'm always thinking of stuff like that. Like, is there something I could do? Get me out of the house or but but yeah, having that freedom or that mindset to be able to do that, I think is kind of the big transformation for people that are still stuck. They're like, oh my God, I'm stuck in this 40 hour, I'm stuck in my salary job, and I gotta, and it sounds crazy when people like us talk about these stories because I know that because I used to listen to people like us,
Yeah.
15 years ago talking like this. And it really
Yeah.
is a legit thing. It's not necessarily hard. I mean, it's not necessarily easy, but you just have to start believing in it because like what you just said is like perfect, right? Because once you kind of have this taste and you've already went through the transition, now it opens up all these other possibilities. I mean, it's crazy how it works. Once you pass through that door, you're learning all these little micro skills that you didn't really realize you had, like because you had to start a business or you had to become a freelancer. And there's all these little things that you didn't have to do when you were working for someone else. They took care of all
Yes.
that or they had a department for that. Now you are every one of those departments to a degree. But once you open that up, it's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, there's so many things that you can do.
And
You just
being
have to believe.
self-employed isn't necessarily the only path, right? Like I left Microsoft twice. I left Microsoft the first time. Um, Let me think. Right as or yeah, right as or right before I had my child, because at that time, there wasn't a lot of flexible work options. There really wasn't any such thing. And so, I ended up, leaving Microsoft, joining a contract consulting agency and, doing that for I don't know, 2 or 3 years, where I could work 30-hour weeks. And that was a great, compromise for those years. And that was also just a way to work from home when a lot of other businesses like wanted you on site, but suddenly if you were a contractor, you got a little bit more flexibility. So I think, you don't necessarily have to quit and try to be self-employed. You could explore working something for slightly reduced hours. You could, like I say, explore like some job retraining, going into something new that feels fresh to you. One of the things I was worried about when I was leaving Microsoft in 2019 is I was like, wow, I'm so tired and I'm so burnt out. Am I capable of working a 40-hour week?
Hmm.
I didn't know, like, because I felt so tired. I felt so burnout. I felt so kind of, like, gosh, I've just been in this system for so long. I don't know. I don't know if I can go back to work 40 hours a week. But when I did, I had a little break. I was fortunate in that regard. I was able to take a few months off. When I started my next job, I was excited because it was new and I had a lot of fresh energy. And I think that's kind of the feeling trap we get into. Like when we are in the grind, it feels like, oh, how do I keep going? Well, part of it is like maybe you just need something new.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it. And honestly, that can be a little addicting because that happens to me. I'm like the shiny object freaking, king. But but yeah.
I mean,
But no.
I think if there was one thing I would do differently in my whole career is I would have moved companies more often.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one. And you even mentioned too, the one thing I would say too is a lot of people are doing a lot of fractional stuff these days as well. Like
Yes.
even,
Yes.
instead of doing your role for one company for one salary, I mean, nowadays there's so many companies out there that are looking for maybe they're a little smaller companies, so they can't afford to have you full time. And then there's all the insurance, all the stuff
That's
that
right.
goes along with it. There's a lot of people out there looking for people with your skills that, you know what, maybe they only need you for 10 hours a week or whatever. And then you can go find and have two or three of those, right? And kind of
Right.
design your life that way. And you might even get paid a slightly higher average salary just because,
Or a lot more, right?
or a lot more. Yeah. I'm not even going to,
Right?
I don't want to limit anybody's
Yeah.
thinking, but yeah, you're right. So
Yeah,
there's,
because I mean, if you think about it, right, if a company that's mid-size, can have really great consulting, and let's say they have a contract for, $8 or $10,000 a month, and you're giving them 10 hours a week or something like that, and they're not having to pay, benefits and retirements, and all that kind of stuff, right? It's a huge savings for that company. Plus, it's more flexible for them at a time when making a full-time hire could feel risky because of the economy, right? So it's a huge benefit. I just had a client, a former client, she's doing that. She's consulting for like somewhere between 10 and 20 hours a week. And she has enough time now. She's going to go back and do a year-long master's program.
yeah, it, even with my situation, like I'm a Google Ads guy, right? So like there's some situations where I am just like a sliver on the team, right? Like there's I answer to like a chief marketing officer, right? Or
Right.
I answer to the owner, but I'm all a part of a big team. But then there's some of my clients that literally it's like they have them and then they have like a guy in the warehouse and they have a secretary and then they have me. I'm like pretty much I'm running Google Ads for them, but I'm basically their de facto, chief marketing officer because they don't have
Right.
anybody else looking for anything, so I'm always constantly
Yeah.
throwing different ideas or trying to help them find other people that can join the marketing team. So you just never know. So yeah, there's just so much opportunity out there, and that's like the net of this particular conversation, I think.
So
So,
like, what's your, I'm always looking for kind of like, how do you encourage people to get started? One of the things I say to encourage people to get started is there's this mistaken belief that you generate courage or generate excitement and then you take action. And it's the opposite. When you start taking action, you build confidence and you start to generate momentum and excitement. And so, one of the things I think about in terms of getting people started is just like identify a couple of actions that you can start taking to kind of move yourself along down this path. What would you say in terms of encouraging people to get started?
there's so many. I think a big one for me that I would tell people is like, what kind of problems can you solve? Like,
Yes.
like what is it? I mean, again, there's so many, it's hard to just throw one out there because I don't know. But like for me, it was like what I had a problem. I wanted a different job. I wanted to get closer to the value. So what did I do? I learned how to make money outside of my job, and then that taught me all these other different skills, right? Like I had at the time, I was like, I'll learn how to build a blog, or I need to get more traffic to my blog. So what am I going to do? Oh, I got to learn this Google Ads thing, and it's just like it just starts to kind of grow from there. But what kind of a
I like
problem
that.
are you? Maybe you're solving it for yourself. Maybe you already are solving it for your job that you have now, and just start looking for other people to solve that problem for. I mean that
Yes, I
because
like that.
I think part of one trap that I got myself into, and that's why I was the $500 for a month situation, was they always said, follow your passion, right? And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's great. But you know what? I don't care how passionate I was about like making music. The fact is that like I was only still going to get 0.003 cents for a stream. I was, only going to get paid $50 to go play at a coffee shop once a week. You know what I mean? There was just like no amount of passion could have brought income faster, and that's how I ended up
Sure,
going
sure.
down the rabbit hole, right? So I
Yeah.
one of the guys that I heard say something, his name was Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs, if you remember him. I remember him having all these conversations about people doing blue collar jobs and all that stuff. And he's like, find something that you can do and do well, and then bring your passion to it. Right. Like that is,
I like that.
and that to me really is kind of the key. Right. Because like I didn't grow up in high school and go, oh, someday I'm going to be a Google Ads manager. Well, Google
No.
didn't exist. It didn't exist. So there's another opportunity you didn't know about. You don't know what's going to be there tomorrow. But yeah, it was the same thing. It's like all the stuff I do now does still tether itself back to what I was really interested in when I was in high school and when I was
It
growing up.
does. That's the really interesting thing, and I
Just
would
looks a
say,
little different. That's all. Just
when
looks a
I
little
work with
different.
people on leader branding, um, and, people can learn more, my site, leaderbrandyourself.com, and I'll talk to anybody for 30 minutes about finding this, right, what you just described, which is, if you actually distill, if you look across your life and career and you distill down and you get kind of to the essence of, who I am, the impact I'm looking to have in the world, and how my point of view, my experience, or the lens through which I look at that thing is unique and special. When you can distill that down, you can actually take that personal brand, right? And that purpose, and you can direct it at a lot of different, jobs and situations. You can even direct it at, things that are going on in your personal life, which is so cool, right? Because you start to get really clear. And I just keep coming back to this. When you have like a strong sense of brand and you've done that work, right? How do I want to spend my time? How do I want to use my talent? Right? How do I want to get value from that? In what ways do I get value from that? That all becomes really clear. And just like you're saying, there isn't like one job that you were meant to do in this world. There's a lot of different ways that you can point that and have tremendous satisfaction.
I, one of my friends too, that like, people always talk like, oh, well, I don't want to do an office job or I don't want to do a tech job anymore, anything like that. I have a friend of mine, well, actually two friends of mine. One of them just he just loved working in his yard. He was the guy that
Yeah.
was building like restraining walls and putting up, landscaping his yard. Well, one day he just hung his shingle, like literally just said, hey, I'm going to be a handyman for people. And
Right.
eventually that evolved into like, I mean, he's a very successful full-time painter. Like he paints interior,
Great.
exterior houses, and that's how he transitioned from what he was doing before. I had another
Yeah.
one of my friends. He was a middle management or I would say upper management at Fastenal. I don't know if you know Fastenal. This is a Fortune 500 company. Same thing with him. He's just like, I've got these rental properties and I would rather go and like clean out toilets during the day and like take care of my properties than do what I'm doing or have to go to China again for the umpteenth time, because he was traveling all over the world. And eventually he was able to manifest that. And now he has this whole like vacation rental in a very vacation hot spot in the middle of
Fantastic.
Wisconsin. So it's like you just don't know. I mean, it wasn't like he woke up one day and like I'm going to be a vacation rental magnate, in
Right.
in the Wisconsin Dells. But it's just interesting. It doesn't have to be, oh, I got to do ads or I got to do tech or whatever. It doesn't have to be that. It could literally be anything that that there's a demand and there's problems to solve. That's what you're looking for, whether it's mowing someone's lawn or I don't know, rebranding freaking Google or something. I don't know. I'm getting a little out of my
Yeah,
getting a
or
little
even, I
crazy
mean,
there, but
honestly, just getting your next corporate job, but just one
yeah.
that suits you better, right?
Yep.
Hey, listen, Corey, it's been so
Yep.
great spending time with you today. And thank you so much for having me.
Yep.
It's I like I say, it's a topic that's been near and dear to my heart.
Okay. Thanks for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Before you go, I want you to just tell everybody where they can find you and then
Lovely. Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Eve Enslow, and you can find me at leaderbrandyourself.com. Leaderbrandyourself.com. There's a way you can actually book a call with me. And like I said, if you're thinking about this, trying to imagine yourself in another life, I'll talk to anybody for 30 minutes about that. And, it's a warm cup of coffee kind of call. So, don't be afraid to schedule. You're not going to get a hard sell or something like that. We'll have a warm cup of coffee kind of call to see what might be possible for you.
awesome. Take her up on that. And the last thing I'll say is if you want to find me, redefiningretirement.io, that's probably the first place to start. I'm going to have all these links in the show notes. So definitely whoever you want to talk to, just look there. And finally, thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. We're on Spotify and Apple now. So if you could just throw us a review on there because that helps the algos bring us more people and then we can have better discussions and more and more. But otherwise, thanks again for taking the time to listen because every second you spend with us is like super valuable because there's so much other things that you could be reading, watching, doing. So thank you so much. And thanks again, Eve. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.